I think we'll take questions now from the floor. Right down there. Go ahead.
Neil Chandler from the Daily Star Sunday. I'd just like to ask Phil Shiner. You mentioned a forthcoming case involving deaths and torturing of Iraqi civilians in British detention. How many deaths are you talking about? Further, you mentioned the young girl getting shot by a squaddy in a tank. Could you give us any more details on that? Where and when did that happen?
I'll do my best on both questions. On the 20th of May 2003, Lieutenant Colonel Nicholas Mercer, a UK Army officer who was head of Army Legal, wrote an order that says chillingly to all the troops who were there, there have recently been a number of deaths of Iraqi civilians in custody with various units. Now, the MOD have lied ever since. When Panorama tried to find out what did Mercer mean by a number, they said 2. It's not 2. It's probably 7 or 8, and it may be more. But that was the 20th of May, 2003. The ongoing disclosure in the Bahamut inquiry keeps turning up more and more and more cases where the Royal Military Police have investigated deaths where there's a common pattern. Often these men are arrested and subjected to severe abuse on arrest in their homes. Sometimes women and children are abused, and sometimes pregnant women have given miscarriages, etc. Then these men are abused, rifle-butted, hooded, sometimes with 2 hoods, in the extreme conditions, and unsurprisingly, they die. And every time they die, it's said that they've died of a heart attack or natural causes. They've never been seen by a UK doctor. Usually somebody has accepted somebody else's word or something that's been written down on a piece of paper. So I can't tell you how many Iraqis we killed whilst we held them in UK detention facilities. You'll have to ask the Ministry of Defence that question. As for the small girl, it was habit for her and her young friends to play in the street, and often UK tanks would stop and they would get out, and trying to win the battle for hearts and minds, they would give the children sweets. On the particular morning in question, for some unknown reason that's never been explained, so I can't tell you, the tank stops at the end of the street. She's there in her yellow dress. A rifleman pops up and blows them away. And you'll have to ask the Ministry of Defence why that happened, because they won't tell me. And that's one of the reasons and one of the cases why we are calling for judicial inquiry into all of these deaths.
Back there. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Deborah Haynes for The Times. This is a question for Julian. The Pentagon spokesman said last night that the names of 300 Iraqis have been released as part of the Iraq war logs, and their lives could now be in danger. Are you worried that the careful vetting that you outlined this morning maybe wasn't careful enough and people's lives have been put at risk?
No, I'm worried that the press chooses to credibly report statements like that from the Pentagon. In fact, the Pentagon would not have been able to review our material in those few hours. It is simply logistically impossible. And we also have strong confidence in our redaction process, which is an opt-in process. So that statement by the Pentagon presumably at its base is referring to their own internal review of their collection of significant actions for Iraq. It is not referring to our material, but you'll notice that they do not say that fact. Instead, they try and issue some deceptive statement to fool the world press, as they did last time with some similar statements, into reporting something that is not true.
Yeah, go ahead.
Paul Harrison from Sky News. Julian, you said in your opening statement that you make a promise to all your sources that you will, in quotes, do them justice to for all their efforts. But given that we've seen a very much a shrugging shoulders attitude or a turning a blind eye from the Americans thus far, according to these documents, will that not continue? And therefore the efforts of your sources may well largely be in vain, or have you had positive noises from the US already?
Well, it's an interesting question as to how responsive government is to the condemnation of its people and the rights of other people. But the shrugging of shoulders is, of course, the second arm of powerful people. The first arm is silence. So we've gotten beyond silence, and now we see an attempt to act in a nonchalant manner about something that is very serious. That does not mean that it is not treated seriously. Rather, there is, or at least was, certainly early on with the Afghan material, an attempt to make it look like it would not be treated seriously, to frame the material as if it was of no consequence. I highly recommend a Daily Show episode which collected all those "there's nothing new in this material" reports for Afghanistan. And as it has turned out, of course, that is not true. In fact, according to Pew Research, total war reportage in the United States for that week increased 300% from 6% to 18%. The approval rating for the Afghan war decreased approximately 15%, and Barack Obama's personal rating, depending on which poll you read, decreased somewhere between 4 and 8%. So those are only, of course, crude figures that speak about the whole rather than individual cases, but we can see continual reportage from far away, high-quality reportage in the past 2 weeks from Norway and Espresso in Italy based upon that Afghan material, a number of parliamentary inquiries. I will be speaking at the UN early next month in relation to the Afghan material. So I expect the same thing to happen for this material for Iraq, and maybe even more. We're talking about 5 times the number of deaths in the same period. We've also put together, I think, a much stronger coalition, a much broader coalition at this time, involving not just print organisations, but human rights groups and lawyers and so on. So I think we're going to see some concrete effects, if not just the perceptual effects about how wars are conducted. An interesting note is that when I made the opening about the truth being the first casualty of war, we actually see that most wars that are started by democracies involve lying. Vietnam War and the Gulf of Tonkin incident involved lying. The start of the Iraq War involved very serious lies, which were repeated and amplified by some parts of the press. Which leads us to say what? Not that isn't the world terrible because there's a lot of lying by officials, but rather it leads us to a great hope that democracies don't start wars unless there's lies. So if there's enough truth early on enough, then perhaps we won't see these kind of wars.
Over there, in white shirt.
Hi, sir. Hi, question for Julian. Ed Caesar from the Sunday Times. There's been some suggestions in the hacking community that the systems that Wikileaks uses don't offer sources the full protection that you advertise on the site. Can you comment on that?
There is a lot of tabloid press surrounding our organisation, and of course every organisation that has a high profile and is involved in controversial activities, I have seen no reports that are credible.
No, right down here. Yeah. Yourself.
Yeah, I'm from ITN. Can I just ask you a very general question? From your reading of all the reports that you've gathered, how would you characterise the conditions that existed in Iraq in the time period that you're reporting on?
Well, I think John is probably the best place to answer.
Could you answer it yourself first? I'm sorry, would you mind?
You prefer the more ignorant opinion, but I'll let John answer first, and if he misses something, then I'll comment.
Our focus is entirely on the victims and those who died. So what we can see, but it is simply a finer, detailed picture of what was actually already very well known by the world at large and press and media, is this relentless grind of daily killings, day by day, in almost every town, every province in Iraq, of checkpoint killings, drive-by shootings, with no end. And the effect that must have on the ordinary Iraqi people is just uncalculable. In regard to the other kinds of information in the logs, torture and other observations, we have nothing to say at this point.